was Augustus Caesar? Although we often think of Augustus Caesar just because of his influence on Christianity, because, after all, he issued the census that brought Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem and started the Pax Romana, allowing Christianity to flourish, Augustus Caesar was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. He built upon his father's legacy and genius to establish himself as one of the most brilliant politicians in history. In different stages of his life, Augustus Caesar was ruthless, conservative, and a master propagandist. Augustus Caesar saw himself as the continuation of his adopted father because Julius Caesar had been murdered by his closest friends. Augustus was led to pursue power ruthlessly. After the extremely violent way that Julius Caesar was killed, Augustus and the Caesarians, who were followers of Caesar, thought that they needed violence and ruthlessness to gain power. Julius Caesar had left poison pills in his will. He knew that his enemies would try to convince the public of how evil he was, so he left the equivalent of $15,000 to each Roman citizen because of his immense wealth. He also gave land to the public and adopted Julius Caesar as his heir. Thus, Augustus Caesar became the physical embodiment of his adoptive father, according to what the Romans believed, at least. So now it was Augustus Caesar's duty to avenge his father's death. In October 43 BC, Augustus formed the Second Triumvirate with Lepidus and Mark Antony to try and restore stability to the Roman Republic. Under the Triumvirate, many began to hate Augustus because of his acts. He began to hunt down anyone who was involved in his father's death. Once he chose 300 high-ranking prisoners of war and offered them up at the altar of the god Julius as human sacrifices. Augustus was also so afraid of having the same fate as his father that once, when he thought a man named Quintus Gallius was hiding a sword under his toga, just like Brutus had, fearing that he would be mistaken if he searched the man on the spot in front of everyone, he ordered officers to drag away Quintus Gallius and torture him like a slave. However, he did not confess to anything, but Augustus still tore his eyes out and gave him the death sentence. Augustus also killed the son of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, saying, quote, "There can only be one son of Caesar," unquote. He did this after the Triumvirate had split apart and he had killed Mark Antony, who was then Cleopatra's lover. My second point is that after defeating the political enemies, his political enemies and competitors, Augustus attempted to rebrand himself as a patriotic conservative. Now that he was sole ruler of the empire, he wanted people to forget his ruthlessness. He wanted to rebuild Rome in its older form and restore the faith and values of older Rome. Many believed that the decline of the Roman Republic was due to the erosion of the public's morals. Augustus enacted anti-adultery laws to encourage people to get married and have kids. He made women's adultery criminal and penalized unmarried men and childless couples. However, Augustus's own daughter, Julia, broke these laws. She was exiled to a tiny island without men and alcohol. I know, very sad. Visitors were only allowed after Julia had given a full description of these people to her father. Augustus was so disappointed in Julia that whenever she came up in conversation, he would quote Homer's Iliad and say, quote, "I wish I didn't have a wife and that I died childless," unquote. Augustus Caesar tried to restore the old religion because many had lost faith in the gods because of these civil wars. He wanted to restore the confidence of the people in the gods, which would then restore stability to the empire. Augustus saw a return of many popular festivals and games in the gods' honor. He also rebuilt or restored 82 temples, many of which had been destroyed during the civil wars. He demonstrated his commitment to piety by assuming the role of high priest of Rome. Thirdly, knowing that his father met his fate in part because of his flirtation with kingship and power, Augustus became a master propagandist. He began to create a narrative around himself by painting himself as a normal guy and by living like a common man. He lived very simply. Instead of being named king, he just called himself the first citizen. And, except on special occasions, he wore only common clothes made by his family out of wool. His chosen hobby was fishing, so that he would appear like a common man. He also cultivated a peasant persona in his choice of food. He encouraged stories of his frugal eating habits and boasted to his stepson Tiberius, quote, "Not even a Jew, my dear Tiberius, fasts so scrupulously on the Sabbath as I have today," unquote. Some records indicate that Augustus might only have eaten an ounce of bread and a few grapes in each meal. He was also sparing with his wine consumption, scarcely drinking more than 3 sips at dinner. To control the view that the Roman public had on him, Augustus did many public works. He commissioned these public works with his own money. He maintained roads and public buildings and temples. He used mostly the finest materials. In fact, he said, quote, "I have found a city of bricks and left a city of marble," unquote. He promoted art and literature, like the Aeneid, for instance, to convince people that his reign was ordained by the gods. In conclusion, although we might only remember Augustus Caesar for his appearance in the Bible, there is much more to his story. Augustus Caesar was so afraid of having the same death as his adoptive father that he was able to build upon his legacy and genius and to establish himself as one of the most brilliant politicians in history through being at different stages of his life, ruthless, conservative, and a master propagandist. Thank you.